My mother always tells me to smile and put on a happy face. She told me I had a purpose to bring laughter and joy to the world. Is it just me? Or is it getting crazier out there?
Todd Phillips, great to be sitting down with you to talk about Joker. Let's start with the fact that Joker is one of the most famous comic book villains in the world, certainly DC's most famous villain. There's no shortage of amazing comic books, no shortage of amazing performances of this character on screen. And yet, as I understand it, you pretty much respectfully put all that in a box and started building this character in your movie from the ground up.
We did. I think we had to do that because I think if we looked back too much, certainly at the films for me and the filmmakers that have been involved, it would be paralyzing with just overwhelming sort of intimidation, or So for us, it was very much a little bit about ignoring respectfully those things because we were trying to do our own thing. Certainly there are things we took from the comics, traits, and obviously the idea of Joker's from the comics, so it's not that we ignored it totally. We just really wanted to try something completely different, and I think for me and Joaquin, it was a little bit about, okay, we can't look back.
But I guess there must have been something specific about this character that for you personally made you go, this is the right character to make my vision of this movie about. Well,
yeah, I mean, I first of all, like you said, he's one of the biggest villains certainly in the fictional world. Maybe Darth Vader is a bigger villain, but Joker's up there. I also like what Joker represents to people because he sort of represents something different, but he's always represented chaos and mayhem and, in a weird way, freedom. So I just thought if we can get a great actor like Joaquin, it could be a pretty intense exploration.
To your fear and sorrow, smile, and maybe tomorrow.
Joaquin, lovely to talk to you about Joker. Let's start with the fact that every filmmaking experience and every role that you take is obviously unique. What was it about Joker? How did Joker compare in playing Arthur Fleck to other movies you've made? I guess in terms of the enjoyment you took from your job on this film.
Yeah, I mean, I like characters that I think are challenging. So when I say I enjoy something, it's because there's a lot of work and thought that goes into it. Todd and I, it didn't feel like it ever really stopped for me. We would go home, separate apartments, and call each other and talk about the upcoming week. So it was just something that was always on my mind, and there seemed to be really an endless amount of possibilities of how I could play the character, and even in each scene. So it was something that was just, it was exciting, it was inspiring, there was an energy to it that felt unique.
And through the course of your life, had you ever read a Joker comic, seen a performance of the Joker, or I guess just been presented with this character in any way that even for the briefest of moments you might have thought, that's a role I'd like to play, or at least that would be an interesting character to play?
Well, I used to collect comics when I was younger. I think my first introduction to the world of Batman and Joker was Arkham Asylum, a graphic novel. And I will tell you this. I had a deal with my friends when I was 14 that we were going to move out of our town and we were going to go make some money, and then we were going to come back and form a vigilante group, a superhero group. And they did, and I never went back. But they're this really, I shouldn't talk about them too much, but
because they're superheroes.
Yes, so you got to keep it quiet. But yeah, that's true.
You're gonna be a clown, at least you can be a good one. You know that, right?
Hey!
Come on, clown, let's go! We got the side! Let's go! Stop them! Go, 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 go! Let's go, let's go! Crazy stop, man! Hey!
Were you writing with Joaquin's voice in your head? Did you already have him in mind at that stage to be your Joker?
Yeah, and it wasn't so much we were writing in his voice because I didn't know Joaquin personally. I just knew the great work he's done for the last 25 years or so, and I knew what he was capable of just from seeing those other performances, but I didn't necessarily know his voice. It just helps me, and this might be a weakness of me as a writer, but I'm always writing with someone in mind, even on the Hangover movies, even on, old school. I'm always writing, and we don't always get the person that you're writing it with them in mind, but it just sort of helps me visualize it in a way. But we got stuck on Joaquin immediately and early and intensely. So if he didn't do it, and I'm not quite sure what we would have done.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Was there a plan B? Had you even considered the idea that he might say no?
We never did intentionally, even when we would just be having lunch, like just talking, even if it came up, well, what if Joaquin doesn't do it? We never even went down that road because for me, when you plan on a plan B becomes plan A.
Right.
But it's a superstitious thing. So we just would not have that conversation.
So you sit down with Joaquin Phoenix and you pitch him, I guess, to a certain extent, your vision of what you want this character to be and your idea for Joker. At that point, what did you say to him? And how convinced were you, I guess, that he was going to say yes when he left that room?
Well, it was not. He did not say yes, and I was not convinced at all. It took me a few months to get him to say yes. But the first time I met him, I brought the script with me. I didn't send it to him, and I just wanted to tell him a little bit before he read it about the world that we're trying to create and about what we're going for. Because you've seen the movie. While it's about a comic book character, it's not a comic book movie.
No.
So I didn't want him to just be turned off seeing the cover page and thinking, there's no way I'm making a comic book movie and throw it away. So first I wanted to position it in the right light. Then I left thinking, okay, he understood it. Then he read it, and he called me, and he liked it, and he wanted to talk. And then we just ended up talking for months before he really came on to do it.
Arthur, I have some bad news for you.
So you're presented with Todd Phillips' vision for this movie. You sit down with him and he tells you about what he wants to do. And at that point, I guess, you sort of start thinking about how that might tie into what you would like to do with this character. Was there something he said in that meeting that began your conviction for why you might do this role? Because I know you took some time to think about whether you'd actually take it. Yeah,
a lot's been made of that I took time to make this decision. I mean, I always do that. It wasn't terribly unique. I think it's, you have to consider a lot when you're making a decision like this. You're dedicating yourself to not only the making of the film, but also to the promotion of it. But was there one thing? There wasn't. What he first introduced me to, before I even read the script, was he showed me videos, a clip from an unreleased documentary of somebody that had this condition in which they couldn't control their emotions, and they would have these emotional outbursts that came in the form of laughter. And I thought that was a really interesting way to approach the Joker's laugh. Because I guess I'd always thought that it was just this kind of maniacal laugh, and it was meant to provoke, and yet this was a different understanding of it. And he talked about it being almost painful. So I think that was the starting point for me.
What's so funny? Freak!
Being on set and having written these scenes with Joaquin's, an idea of Joaquin playing them, how different was it actually being there, watching him work, to what you'd imagined it might look like in the writing stage?
It was pretty close. I mean, and I don't mean that he didn't. I mean, I don't know that I've ever worked with an actor who is as additive as Joaquin or who elevates the material in such a way. That said, we had spoken so much about it up to that point that I kind of knew where it was headed. But still, every day, we would surprise each other with the things we kind of, because, you know, there's one thing, you make a movie 3 times. You make it once when you write it, you make it once when you shoot it, and then you make it again in the editing room. And so there's a lot different in the shooting than in the writing. And again, that was the fun part, and I don't speak for Joaquin, but I know for him too, that we didn't, you know, stick to everything. It wasn't written in stone, and we gave ourselves the freedom to explore.
You think this is funny? Is this a joke to you?
On paper, you sort of hear, oh, it's a Joker origin story. And I think you begin the movie thinking, oh, I'm going to understand a character that has previously always kind of been an enigma on screen. And yet, I think it's fair to say that Arthur is still an enigma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that felt, it felt really important, and it feels accurate for that character. But you said it so well, so just, you know.
I have a tendency to do that, to take all the best bits for the question.
It's great. I really appreciate it. As long as the information's out there, it's great. Thank you so much. One small thing.
Yeah.
When you bring me out, can you introduce me as Joker?
I can only assume there is a great deal of trust that goes into working on a film like this with your director and that filmmaking collaboration. I guess that was necessary to explore how Arthur might react in certain moments, like actually on the day when you're shooting a scene, pushing the scene to the limits. Could you have done that without building that relationship with Todd?
No. You know, we both were trying to surprise each other and to inspire each other every day. Something very exciting about having 2 people trying to figure out something different. But it was a really special process. I mean, I think that by the second week, we just clicked in a way that I hadn't anticipated, and almost became like we didn't have to verbally communicate. We started to have the really similar ideas simultaneously, and yeah, I think it's obviously really important. You know, we were working closely together. There wasn't really a blueprint for this. We were trying to find something that was different and that was surprising, and it seemed that that's what the character required, right? The moment that we felt like we were about to identify what motivated him in the scene, it seemed to just lose its energy. And I think that we knew that we had to approach this in a way where we weren't quite sure what he was going to do. We were going to surprise each other. I used to think that my life was a tragedy. But now I realize it's a comedy.
What sounds great is how much freedom you were given. I mean, I believe that, like, convincing Warner and DC in the initial stage to make the movie at all took a little bit more than once you'd got it. You were kind of left alone.
Yeah. I mean, I will say they were horrible when we were trying to convince them to do it, but I understand why. And then once they said yes, they were unbelievable in the all right, just go and make the movie and show us when it's done and get out of here. So we were really able to, you know, it felt, I think Joaquin said this, or maybe it was somebody on the crew said, it feels like we're making a student film on the day, you know, because we kept it really small. And it was, you know, the movie, I wanted the movie to have a very handmade, intimate feeling to it, which is really the antithesis of most of these superhero sort of world films. Our budget was very small, and that gives you, weirdly, more freedom because there's just less pressure on the movie. And we were able to take our time with certain scenes or go back and reapproach a scene from in a different light. And I think that was pretty liberating.
And finally, in a world where everyone thinks they could do my job, check out this guy.
When I was a little boy and told people I was going to be a comedian, everyone laughed at me. Well, no one's laughing now.
You can say that again, pal.
As an audience, watching yourself and Robert De Niro is incredible. How was that experience for you working with him in that moment?
We didn't really talk. We didn't socialize much. I mean, sometimes I think sometimes it depends on the scene. Sometimes you want to interact with somebody in between takes because that's kind of what feels necessary for the scene. But this didn't feel like that. It felt like we were two people in completely different states, and so I couldn't allow myself to think like I'm working with Robert De Niro, and it couldn't be a part of my thought process. But I think more than anything, we shot all of the Murray Franklin scenes over a 4-day period. It was the first time that I played Joker. So there were so many moving parts. It was a huge sequence, many cameras, a lot of extras. So I think that I just tried to stay focused.
Do you see this as kind of a sharp right in terms of your filmmaking career? Like, if we go back to sort of you from 2000 and Road Trip through Old School, through the Hangover movies, does this feel like a different thing, or does this share some filmmaking DNA?
I mean, I think it does, but I understand why people don't. I think if you took the Hangover movies and watched them back to back to back, and I'm not suggesting you do, but if you were to give it those 8 hours, you realize there's some real darkness in those movies. And the other thing that I've always tried to do in comedy, and we certainly, I think, did here, was run things through a realistic lens. The comedies always felt like they took place in the real world. The situations were absurd, and that's where the comedy came from, but they always felt grounded in the real world. And in Joker, I kind of applied the same ethos. You know, we really wanted to run everything through as realistic a lens as possible, which I think is what makes the movie affecting for some people and why they weren't laughing. But I also think it gives it the gravity that it needed.
This is the last time we'll be meeting.
You don't listen, do you? You just ask the same questions every week. How's your job? Are you having any negative thoughts? All I have are negative thoughts.
It's a film that I think really hands the responsibility of what you take from it to the audience, because it doesn't paint in black and white. It's all shades of grey. Are you surprised by how different the reactions are to the film from different people?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think that's I expected that going into it. Look, I had different feelings about the character as I read the script and as I made the film. Wildly different feelings about him. So it's what I would expect, but it's what I liked about the film is I think that it engages the audience in a way that is rare. It asks you to participate in this. It's not didactic. It's not telling you precisely what to feel. And I think that's rare in movies. And part of what really attracted me to the film and to the character, I feel like for an audience member, you're engaged in a great way.
I think we knew it when we were writing it, is that this is not going to be one of those movies where it is wrapped up with a nice bow. There are a lot of ways to interpret the movie, and it's not something I, want to interpret for people at this stage. Mm-hmm. One day would I? Sure. It's just, to me, part of the fun of making this film, part of the fun of seeing this movie are the questions that come up.
I was going to say, you're not distant enough from it now to be able to look at it subjectively. Then,
right?
Are you? You need
no,
because it still hasn't been released.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, immediately stepping out the cinema in a conversation with someone who had seen a completely different film.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I was speaking to somebody who wrote me an email here from last night. We showed it, and I got an email when I woke up this morning, and she was telling me how she cried from basically the beginning to the end. And I've seen people cry in it before, too, and I understand. There's a lot of emotion, and I think it speaks to Joaquin's performance. But again, I think she was taking from it a different version of the movie than some 24-year-old kid who might come in and just think, wow, that's an interesting approach to a Joker origin story.
Yeah.
I'm left with several conflicting feelings after I see this movie. And I like that. I like that space. It keeps me asking questions about him and about this world and what I've just seen. It makes me wonder what was real and what wasn't. And so I didn't have just one feeling when I was done watching it. But certainly, for me, you see a scene that's 2.5 minutes long. And for me, that was like an entire day of shooting, and so it's never gonna match the experience you have. It's always gonna be different for me. My feeling, it's never gonna match the experience of making the movie, because I love acting. I love collaborating with people, and there's just such a full, rich experience for me that the movie can never live up to that. So I'm never gonna have the experience that you have when viewing it.
Send in the cloud.